Okay, welcome back to House Education on January 29th, 2025. This is also Mental Health Advocacy Day here in the State House. We are fortunate in our committee to have some folks who are focused on the mental health of our students and our young people in Vermont to give us a presentation of their work. And we have ample time for questions to the point of whether they have ample time for questions, but let's take advantage of our time together. Presenting first are Matt Habedank. Habedank. And Amy Irish. Yep. Welcome. Tell us about what you do, and the floor is yours.
I'm Matt Habedank. I am an early childhood and school-based services director at NCSS, which is the designated agency in St. Albans. The division that I oversee provides services embedded in local public schools, a few different types of services. And we also run an alternative independent school, Soar Learning Center in St. Albans Bay, as well as NCSS is the one region in the state where the Parent-Child Center is a part of the designated agency, and the Parent-Child Center services are also included in the division that I oversee.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Irish, and I am a program manager for the school-based services at NCSS. And I work with Matt. So I oversee our school-based services that include our behavior intervention programs that work directly with intensive needs students in the school, as well as our clinical school-based services and our consultation services for behavior programming.
I would say, first of all, thank you for having us and thank you for the time today. It's always wonderful to come in and talk to the House Ed Committee. I will say you guys got some nice digs going on here. This is way bigger than the upstairs committee room. You know, the question we were to come talk about was mental health supports in K-12 education and whether services are better provided on a model that's provided by the school or provided by mental health. And I think the answer to that, which is complicated answer, is it's better in partnership. You know, that's, you know, really the foundations of Success Beyond 6 Medicaid funding. And, you know, back to at least the mid-90s, our school-based system of mental health care are in partnership between schools and mental health. The funding is built that way, and the services really run better that way. That's not always a simple answer. That can be a complicated partnership at times. But when schools and DAs or mental health providers work together, the services, I think that is when the services are the best they can possibly be, both from a fiscal lens and from an actual service delivery and benefit to the student lens. There are a couple points of that. We put together a presentation or a little one pager that I think you all have, but please feel free to jump in with questions. You know, part of my goal when we have the chance to talk to the committees is to answer questions you have. You know, what are the things on your plates and your minds that you're concerned about? Part of the reason that partnership works very well is just the capacity and availability of services. You know, the state has a high need. K-12 students in Vermont right now have a really high need for mental health supports. And, you know, the harsh reality is there is just not enough resources go around to meet all the need for all the students. And the partnership between schools and DAs really is the most effective way to leverage those limited resources and make sure that they're all utilized to their maximum capacity and that they get spread around to the best we can. It's a part of the interesting equation to that is it's very different around the state. You know, the service is part of the beauty of Success Beyond 6, and part of the thing that makes it complicated is they really have developed to meet the needs of the local schools with the resources of the local DAs. So no two regions in the state look exactly the same in terms of what the capacity is, what the service array is, and what the needs are. So while that is very sensitive to local issues and being able to really meet the need as best we can, it is complicated. You know, it makes the answer to some of these questions pretty complicated.
Let me just interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar with it, can you just give a very brief description of what Success Beyond 6 is?
Yeah, thank you. And if I use acronyms and start going off with that, stop me there too. Success Beyond 6 is a Medicaid funding stream that is essentially leveraging, I believe it's global commitment dollars in a way that the DA's designated agencies contract with local public schools to provide the services. Success Beyond 6 Medicaid has a match rate that varies a little bit from year to year. I think this year it's 42.5%, somewhere right around there. So, for all the Medicaid billing that DAs do connected to the contract they have with the local public school, the local public schools contract is designed to pay about 42.5% of that, which is local public tax dollars to leverage the Medicaid funding stream that helps provide the services for Medicaid students and for some other students that are built into the capacity of the system. In the end, it kind of fluctuates. It means that schools pay about half of the cost of what the services actually cost to provide. And it's in place in all the different regions of the state to varying degrees. At NCSS, we use Success Beyond 6 funding. We have a school-based clinician program where a mental health clinician is embedded in local public schools. We have 2 one-on-one behavior interventionist programs where mental health staff is matched one-on-one with a student in a public school. One of those is for what you would kind of think of as EBD, a special ed classification. And one is kids on the autism spectrum or kids who need that kind of services and have a similar sort of behavioral mental health profile. We have what's called a PBIS consultant program, which is a master's level board certified behavior analyst embedded in public schools that carry a small caseload of kids that they see at relatively lower intensity levels, but then use that funding and that position to do a lot of school-wide work on school-wide behavior systems, supporting staff, doing staff training. A great position to sort of leverage that position both for kid needs and the school-wide program. And then we also have SOAR Learning Center that I mentioned before, which is also built on Success Beyond 6 Medicaid. And those services are relatively representative of what's around the state. Like I said, the service makeup is not quite the same, and Success Beyond 6 is built to be a little bit flexible in terms of what it provides. But in general, that's kind of the gist of it. So the capacity is part of it. The other thing that the partnership really provides is being able to leverage some of the other connectedness and some of the other services beyond the direct supports that I think we think of. I think the one-on-one BI model is the one that is most commonly associated with Success Beyond 6. That's where it really started. But some of the other things like service planning and care coordination, transportation, connecting kids with other mental health services outside of the school-based system, those partnerships and sort of the capacity and the availability of services that we can leverage are all, that's part of kind of, I'll call it an indirect benefit of those contracts and that partnership. That's not what schools don't approach us and say, I want this because I want care coordination and transportation and connection to other services. They want support for the kid, but that is definitely part of what goes on with it. The drawback, and I did throw some barriers. I don't want to come in here and say that the system is perfect and it's, that there's not issues we're facing right now. There's just, staffing has been a concern really since COVID. We had a lot of people leave positions, and we have not gotten back to capacity since then. We're doing better. I will say the legislature has done a lot in the last few years in helping to fund the designated agencies, which includes Success Beyond 6. But we're not quite back there yet. So that is a need that we need to fill. And I think that's something that schools struggle with when they think about partnering with the DAs, is we can't always meet the need right away. And those kids are coming to school every day, no matter what, so we are very sensitive to that need of the public schools. But it's not, we don't always have the resource ready. So, as much as there is a lot of capacity and there's a great scope of services that are available, there are some difficult situations where kids are not getting served immediately and they're coming to school every day still.
One of the other pieces that I'll speak to is just about the quality of services that we can provide when we have a partnership with school systems and our designated mental health agencies to push those mental health supports into public schools. And I think we see an improvement in quality in that partnership with both in structure and the pressures that we face. So from the structure lens, the designated agencies have both the BI minimum standards that are related to Success Beyond 6. So there is an actual set of very clear expectations for us to be able to draw down those Medicaid dollars. And those standards are delineated from the oversight of the programming, both clinically, as well as who we can hire, what their credentialing has to be, what their training level has to be before they can provide those services in the schools. And so the definition of what a behavior interventionist is and what the qualifications are that are delineated very clearly through that model. as well as annual and ongoing training, and the supports that need to be in place for clinical oversight of those positions, because as you know, the kids that we're working with are some of the most vulnerable kids in our communities and are really at risk of losing placement of being able to access their education in the communities that they're gonna grow up in. So I think that schools obviously don't have that structure developed in their system, so they're at times hiring similar positions and trying to create these places, because they've said to us, you know, these kids are showing up, like Matt said, we don't want to create these systems, but we're going to have to if you don't have the people. And the reality is the quality is going to be different, because our structures in the DA system and investing in that partnership are worth it because it already exists. Where schools are, their structures and the oversight of maybe a BCBA or what a program looks like for a kid who's highly acute doesn't exist, because their system was developed to educate kids, not to provide mental health services. So those systems aren't fully working to the highest potential they could with those staffing that they have, as well as just the depth of that oversight and supervision that's provided and the expertise. So when we have really complex cases that come through our services, we're able to go back through layers of, you know, BCBAs overseen by at least 2 BCBAs at our agency. It's licensed behavior analysts, as well as if it's a really complex case, we have other committees we can pull in. So we have a trauma consult that we have an outside person that comes in and talks about those really complex cases and how do we support these kids, as well as our psychiatrists and outpatient. There's just the depth of knowledge that we have within the designated agency is very different than those seats that they might have in the education system, just because it wasn't designed to do that. So that improvement quality is really clear. And then I also like to say that I think that interaction can be challenging sometimes with schools to create really high quality, different means of supporting the kids that are showing up in our schools. And I think that partnership highlights what we can do to maximize that, in the sense of, I call it space when I talk to schools, of the pressures that the DA system has are very different than the pressures that the education system has, in the sense of, I may see a kid with a really complex need and it's impeding other kids' ability to access their education. And I have a way to go about that, where the school has the pressures of like, but I need all the other kids in that classroom. And I can make decisions and make recommendations that might feel uncomfortable in the moment. And it might not be about an individual kid, it may be about a system change that teachers are not going to like, and it's going to be uncomfortable because it's going to shift sort of their history of working with kids. And there are times when we sit at the tables with schools, because this isn't just BI services, this is also consultation with mental health services. And there's times that we sit at the tables with schools and they do not want to do what we're recommending. And we push really hard, and we often have to both negotiate where we land, right? I'm making a recommendation from a mental health lens, you're making a recommendation from an education lens. And when we push at each other, we've come up with some really creative and different ideas that are not the typical standard vanilla that we've historically worked with in our schools. So that quality is improved by that, us not coming from the same place and not having the same pressures. Whereas if it was just them going at it alone, their pressures are from the people above them who hired them. Our pressures are a little bit different, and that just enhances the quality of that interaction and partnership, which I think is something that we can't speak highly enough about. As far as barriers and needs, we are often seeing people leave the designated agency to go try to work for the schools doing similar work. And a lot of the feedback we get is that some of the pieces that we're required to do are not required when you work in a public school doing the same services, because we're billing Medicaid. We have very clear treatment planning processes that we have to get signatures, and a lot of administrative burden and things that staff are like, why would I do it? I can just go work for a school and work a lot less and not have those requirements. So certainly it's a burden on our system.
I would say, kind of speaking to Amy's point, that it's actually some of those conversations where that friction happens between maybe what the schools want and what we provide, or when the school says, yeah, I know you do this, but what we want is this. A lot of times that's where some of the best solutions come from. And I think that goes back to the initial point of the partnership is really where this is at. And I think the fact that everybody is coming to that table with the best interests of the student at heart, with the best interests of the family at heart, and how do we do it? The way people approach it is not always the same, but that friction, although those meetings can be bumpy and some of those conversations can be a little tough, usually that's where the best work in planning and creativity is done. The other piece, which I think is near and dear to the heart of the legislature, is that these services are cost effective under the Success Beyond Six model. I mean, I know at NCSS, I don't know the exact number right now, but this year alone, this is bringing in probably $10 million in Medicaid funding just into our region that otherwise wouldn't be available. That is all geared towards supporting kids' mental health and behavioral health needs in the public school system. So, you know, the services come at a discount to the school that pumps dollars into the mental health system of care and makes it just a more affordable model is one of the great pieces that makes it works well. I think the schools would tell you that if there's a, you know, because that 42.5% match rate that I talked about earlier, that is all local tax dollars. So I think, you know, schools would say if there's a different way we can come up with that 42.5% besides those coming out of local tax dollars. I know education tax is a very hot topic and the tax burden on Vermonters in general. So I think that's something and you know, from our lens, we want to provide the services and make sure we can get paid for them. And if the less that costs schools, the better. I think that's part of our mission is to make sure we're doing this cost effectively. So schools would say that. So that would be something schools would advocate for. But it's a very cost effective model. It frees up school budget dollars so they can, you know, schools have immense pressures. I can't even imagine, you know, what kind of things the superintendents and school boards go through to try to figure out where those budget dollars get allocated and how they get allocated. And the more we can free up some of this, which Success Beyond Six helps do, that helps make the entire system function a little bit better. And early investment and doing some of these services, especially when we get in with kids early, when their needs are identified early, we can be there with the service provision to meet that need early on. That results in a big cost savings over time. You know, if you can mitigate some of the long-term effects of not providing appropriate mental health care as soon as the need is identified early on, you just have that cost savings is exponential down the line. The difficult part of that is you kind of for a while have to do the preventative work and the downstream work at the same time, you know, so there's always that catches it kind of initially might cost a little more to realize that huge savings down the road.
And then the last piece really is just talking about like what are the benefits of that partnership with our designated agencies partnering with our schools to provide these services. I mean, obviously the most important one is having equitable access for kids to access mental health services that if not offered in their schools, they may not have equal access to in their own time with their families, and that most kids spend the bulk of their day in their school setting. And if we can address those mental health issues there, then that's a great start, but also allows them to access their education. And that's something we're seeing of such an increased need of like kids' mental health needs have to be addressed before they can learn how to do any academic tasks. So being able to do that in that building is certainly helpful. And really the benefits of this partnership is that we're looking beyond just behavior intervention program. We're trying to bring mental health services into schools and getting really creative of how are we making sure all levels of the system are cognizant and addressing the shifting needs of our community members. And anything from how do we know the health of our system? So how do we know when kids are doing well? How do we know when kids are struggling? And how do we prescribe services and make moves on those instead of just sitting around and constantly looking at, you know, office discipline referrals and talking about the kid who keeps struggling? How are we moving on those and trying to make recommendations based on evidence-based practices to support kids in accessing both their education, but also mental health services in school? So that push beyond just that basic intervention, but also the help of the whole system, as well as when kids access mental health services in schools, I really believe it reduces the stigma because it's something that kids are just doing. It's just like they go get, they access music class or special ed services. They're also accessing mental health services. And we can embed it for all students because there's a level of everyone can access them equally, as well as at an intensive level. So just reducing that stigma by making it really readily available and openly accessed is important. And then the other piece is that a lot of our services extend, which I think is my barrier in this whole conversation, is a lot of our services extend well beyond the school. And the schools get frustrated with that at times and say like, this isn't a school problem, but it presents as a school problem. And often we are able to access families by sort of reducing the stigma in the sense of just like getting their kid into services in school. It doesn't involve them necessarily. It opens a door. And when they have a positive experience there, we're able to have more conversations. We're at the table with them, and we're not some big scary unknown. We're someone who's at their school working with their kid and helping their kid do well. And that allows us to have further conversations about other services that might benefit their family as a whole, and really in supporting families and learning how to access those services that can help outside of school as well. And I think that's, as well as the benefits it gives us in there, it's also a barrier that there's so much need in those families right now that are impacting the schools as well.
I would say there's also a couple other things that are sort of, they're not directly related to mental health care in schools, but they are tangential in a way that significantly impacts how we do business. I mean, I think part of those is, again, that's something that my understanding of the legislature is looking closely at, is just the cost of living in Vermont. You know, part of what we can say is that the need to continue to raise Medicaid rates and to continue to raise funding for the designated agency system so we can pay the staff what they need in a competitive market to make sure we fill those positions. But the other side of that equation is just the cost of housing, the cost of living in Vermont in general is a barrier. You know, I know every year for a long time, we have a cohort of students that would graduate from the UVM MSW program. And we typically get one, maybe two of those folks would filter into the agency, and we kind of count on that. In the last few years, that's kind of dried up. And when one of my peers talked to the head of the program and said, you know, what's the story? Is it the agency? Is it, you know, what are you hearing? He said, it's the cost of living. You know, they can't stay in Vermont. They want to stay here. They love the state, but they just can't stay. So that certainly has an impact on what we do. The other thing that I will talk about kind of whenever anyone will listen is the need to get private insurers to pay for some of these services. Right now, a lot of the services that we provide in schools are really only available for kids who are covered through Medicaid. Not all of them, but of the bulk of them. And there are ways that we've built capacity into the system for those funds to cover services like the PBIS consultant program I referenced earlier, where some of that work happens through the schools. The school-based clinician model does some of the same thing, where they serve students individually, but also provide support for staff and training for the staff and work in full classrooms full of kids. But in terms of kids with private insurance, the options are schools can contract for that. And they just pay the full cost of the services, which is much more expensive for the schools and obviously increases pressures on their budgets. But schools do it because they know it's the right thing that happens for the kid. But getting private insurers to cover some of those services, and a lot of this is very well recognized as evidence-based care, as very effective models, and private insurers just don't cover that. I know our DA testified to House Healthcare at the end of last session, probably in April, and that was a little bit of a discussion, and they talked about that and about pursuing the push for private insurers to cover some of this. So that's not kind of directly related, but that's an avenue that I think could have a real positive impact on service delivery as well as cost schools.
Thank you very much. A few questions.
Yeah.
And I think you really hit many of the themes that we've heard repeatedly, that, you know, schools are having to bring these services in-house because the DAs are not able to provide them. And it's largely a staffing issue. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that? I
think yes, I think that's accurate.
And the staffing issue is, as you say, it's a cost of living issue, it's a pay issue, it's a housing issue that we're not necessarily prepared to.
If I may, I would also say that it is a staffing issue on our end, but often what we're hearing recently is that some of those schools who have created their own in-house programs and got them up and running, they hired some positions, are now facing the same struggles that we are. So those same kids are waiting on those same wait lists because they also can't fill the positions. And we've kind of created a challenge that now we're competing for the same pool of people who are offering the same positions. So I think what we're constantly trying to look back is like, how do we partner and find out like what are the pieces you can do and you feel like you can maintain staffing as best you can, and what are the ones we can do, and how do we make sure to bring those together? But those can be tricky conversations.
Well, it is hard because schools are, you know, mandated every day, whereas you have the ability to say, we don't have the staffing for that. And it makes it really hard. We hear year after year, we're leaving money on the table. and I'm gonna guess this comes right back down to staffing.
Yep.
And that's success beyond 6 Medicaid dollars that we're leaving on the table.
Yep.
And that is just follow my line of thought here, tell me if I'm right or wrong. And that is because, the DAs aren't able to get into the school to provide the services simply because they don't have the human beings to do it.
Yeah, if you don't have the staff to go in and provide the services and bill, then you can't draw the dollars down.
So, so that I think is the point that I think we need to remember. As we say, oh my God, we're leaving all these federal dollars on the table. Well, we don't have a magic wand to make them flow here.
Yeah.
It requires people
Yeah.
to do the work.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would say, just to go back to the beginning, the one piece of that too, I think part of the onus on both the DAs and the schools is to look at what we're each doing and make sure that our services that we're building in-house and what we're doing are complementary rather than building the same thing and ending up in competition with each other. There's a piece of it's on us to be efficient and have difficult conversations. I just want to make sure that that's as well.
And, you said you operate a therapeutic, an independent school.
Yes.
A therapeutic school. And how long have you had that?
SOAR started, I think, in 1999,
Okay,
which
so
was
quite a while.
a student and a staff in the basement of a building, and it's now 70 kids, I think, is their capacity. So it's one of, if not the biggest, DA independent school in the state. Yeah.
I only bring it up because, a couple of years ago, we put a moratorium on any new independent schools. And, I sort of think about, nonprofit, community-minded DAs operating an independent school a little bit differently than perhaps a for-profit model or something else. And
We appreciate that.
I don't know if that has come up as an issue, but again, with your staffing problems, no, probably a lot of DAs are not out there trying to open independent schools at this point anyway.
Yeah, and I don't know if it has for other agencies, although I would say my counterparts, usually what they're looking at is what are the needs of the school, those that aren't being met, and what can we do to help solve that problem? You know, so that could include an independent school in other parts of the state, where that's a need within their communities.
I just sort of think about a DA and a school system are both community-based, community-minded, community-purposed.
Yep.
Sure. Okay, thanks. Sorry, dominate everybody. Other questions? Yeah. Oh, and I do have a question, just speaking of you, are BIs, defined differently in your world and in the education world? You were saying that they have to be licensed and this and that, and I just.
Yeah, I think so. The BI, there's a set of expectations called the Success Beyond 6 Behavior Interventionist Guidelines, which outline what are the qualifications for those staff, what are the training that they have to receive every year, how do they need to be supervised. It's a pretty comprehensive document that we have to follow and provide a report to the legislature on annually. So I think that doesn't exist in the same way in public schools, and that's no fault of theirs. I mean, they do a lot of work with paraeducators. I have heard of public schools more these days building what they refer to as a BI position. It's not necessarily apples to apples, though. I mean, it's all geared towards meeting the needs of students. They're not quite the same thing. But again, back to kind of the beginning of what I said, it probably varies a lot region to region. You know, I think what you would find in one region of the state in one school system that they call a BI and how they define it is probably different than what you might find in that region.
Yeah. And I guess one big question ask you, so we're essentially in a way being asked to sort of tear apart and rebuild our education system. How would you do that in a way that better suits the needs of students and might be more cost effective? And if we can get into it, that'd be great.
That's a tricky one, and I'm sure part of that is because that's why it hasn't happened yet. You know, I think the governor's plan that he could put forward is certainly that is going to require a lot of heavy lifting to make that happen. Just from the standpoint of a service provider, but also the standpoint of somebody as a parent who has children in the local public schools. I worry about a school board that is maybe disconnected from my local community and more centralized, having a lot of say over what happens in the community of the school board. So I do worry about pieces like that. I worry where the cost savings is, you know, and aside from drastically reducing the number of superintendents, what other kind of structures would have to be put in place to ensure adequate oversight of schools that are maybe far flung, or, just one superintendent can't oversee that many principals and that many buildings. At the same time, I think both from a financial lens and from an outcome lens, something has to change. I certainly recognize that there's a need for that, and that there's a need to take a little action on that front. So pieces of aligning maybe the system from a state level a little bit more, I certainly can understand. And I don't know, I hope I'm not making any of my superintendent colleagues angry who may hear this. But it's complicated. I certainly feel like there's a time, it's a time for some work to be done. And yeah, the answers are tough. Amy used to be a school board member. I don't know if she has any insight.
No, I mean, I think we're just talking about, like, I think for me, it comes back to the funding of partnership, right? How do we fund something? I don't have the answer, but certainly how do we fund partnerships that allows people to do what they know how to do best and who are the experts in the area, and probably can find the most efficiencies in those areas, instead of trying to recreate them in multiple places. So, I mean, obviously from my perch, the GA system has these pieces all together. I think we need some support on how do we fund that piece as well. So allowing us to do what we can do to support schools and focus on how to fund and support education for education as well. And looking at them as we are best together, not separate, and not trying to do things on our own.
Thank you very much for your time and your insight. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
Okay. All right, we have two more folks coming to speak to us. One online, it looks like, and one in person. I'm going to let you introduce yourselves so that I don't butcher at least one of your last names. Courtney, that would be you, yes. Floor is yours.
Oh, my.
You're go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Coleman. I'm just gonna go ahead and read. And I want to say that I think part of what I was just hearing, this is my first time here, and listening to NCFF and realizing, yes, it is very different in regions across our state. And I think that just really hit home for me right now. So I am a founder of Green Mountain Mobile Therapy, which is a microtransit mobile therapy space that I take to schools. My practice, I'm a private practice clinician. I was trained in the DA system, clinically trained there, and really love working in schools. That's where I found that the collaborative model worked really well for me as a professional. And I felt that it's where you can do some really profound, important work with children and families as well. So Green Mountain Mobile Therapy is an 8.5 by 20 foot cargo trailer that's been converted into a mobile office, play space, and therapy space that I tow from school to school. It is the only one in the country. And it is 100% sustainable. So it's powered on an electric battery, a very large electric battery. That's, I've partnered with school systems, the school system that I live and work in, and meet children where they're at. I'm in 5 schools currently, 2 elementary and middle school and a high school, so all the way through K through 12. And with I carry a pretty high caseload, but that doesn't, it kind of varies week to week.
I'm sorry, did you say what area?
I'm in Chittenden County.
Chittenden.
Yep. What I have learned is that a structured, integrated, statewide mental health care system in schools does not exist. And that is what is desperately needed. And I think, it can be done in a collaborative way because we don't all have the answers. We all can't provide the amount of need that there currently is for Vermont's children. I think that it does, mental health in schools breaks down the stigma, and that has drastically changed in the last 5 years. I mean, I have, 6-year-old clients who introduce me as their feelings teacher. Right? To all of their friends in the cafeteria. And that to me is a huge difference between 7 years ago. So I think the biggest challenges that I personally see, and again, the regions are very different, that the majority of the schools do not have an appropriate therapeutic space. Okay, that's therefore Green Mountain Mobile Therapy. I bring my space with me, right? As long as I can park it, we're good to go. The other piece of this is that there is a current, the licensing challenges for Vermont, for mental health providers in Vermont, is a very large barrier to accessing services and providing mental health in schools. So, yeah, the mental health licensing process. And I think that, there's just no direct funding. There's no systematic structure that is available or that can, build the model that we need right now. I have some quotes here that I would like to read that I think might be helpful from school counselors and just other people that I work with. Middle school counselor says, I believe the schools are currently not equipped to handle a huge amount of unprocessed stress in students' bodies, and there is a need for school-provided support along with DA-provided supplemental support. Systems need to be in place to allow students to have experienced complex trauma to find systems of support before they can even begin to function consistently in a school environment. School systems need more assistance dealing with the effect of trauma on society, COVID-19, racism, sexism, ableism, mental health stigma, and housing crisis. A DA school supervisor says, mental wellness is a crucial component of academic success. Kids in Vermont schools continue to have mental health needs. The recent YRBS data that came out, youth behavior risk assessment or youth behavior risk survey that just came out, it's done every 2 years. It basically says that we have not rebounded since the pandemic in terms of mental health for youth. Providing opportunities for engagement in outpatient therapy during the school day enables some students who might experience barriers to engagement, such as limited access to transportation and parents not being able to take off work. Because going to any appointment, you go to school, you pick your child, you wait for them to get out of their class, to get in the car, you drive to the mental health appointment, you wait for an hour, then you drive back. So we're at 2.5 hours, right? At that point. And that is almost impossible for working parents to do. If you want people to provide this service, then they need to be paid competitive wage. We need to be doing a better job in Vermont of recruiting mental health providers who share aspects of racial identity with the kids in our schools. An elementary school counselor says, there is no direct Tier 3 mental health system of care in schools. We can't put all our eggs in one basket, such as DAs or just schools, and they need to be more, a school-based model is not sustainable because it's not supported currently. So just some basic kind of recommendations that I have. I think we need to think creatively about alternative funding for mental health services that allow for accessibility and break down the barriers for children to access. So is that, okay, so one of the biggest challenges is space. Let's figure out the space because no service provider is going to go into a school and provide direct mental health services in a hallway. That doesn't work, right? And so that's just an example. Create a school-based mental health license track that allows for providers to bill Medicaid for direct and indirect services. That is a little bit more, probably is a harder lift, but again, I think it can be done. And if you're looking at the licensing challenges within our state. Ultimately, school-based mental health services has to be collaborative. There's no way that we can all do the amount of work that is needed for children in Vermont without all working together. And I agree that it definitely gets challenging at times when you have these difficult conversations or when recommendations are not followed or necessarily agreed with, for whatever reasons. But I've also learned that, and I've also seen that the opposite side of things, where a child's life, because we have been able to collaborate and we have been able to meet the specific needs, has been really transformed because of the collaborative model. We just all need to be on the same page of what that collaborative model is. And the regions are so vastly different in Vermont, and it's, yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say.
So just for clarification, you are a private practice
I'm
mental
a
health
private
provider.
practice, yep, and I have a
And
nonprofit.
you sort of bring your private practice to all the schools.
Yeah.
So therefore, you're being paid either by private insurance or direct pay from.
Mostly Medicaid,
Mostly Medicaid,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Which would not be, success by beyond $6. This is
No.
just straight.
it's just
traditional
straight Medicaid.
Yeah.
98% of my caseload is Medicaid,
Okay.
yeah. So,
How many, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go right ahead.
About how many schools do you
5,
service? Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you're not contracted by the school
Nope.
necessarily, you're more hired by the parent.
yes,
Yeah.
so I can take referrals from I take referrals from pediatricians' offices and, youth centers and schools. During the school academic year, I prioritize any referral, and they come from the schools. During the summer, because I still work in the summertime when schools are closed, which is another part of some of the challenges, right? Because not all DAs are open and are providing services when the schools are in vacation and schools are closed. And so, kids are just kind of out there, not getting the services that they need at that time. And so, yeah, so I accept, referrals from anyone at that point.
Fascinating. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate you coming in.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
All right, Courtney, you are up. You'll have to unmute yourself. Great, welcome you to just introduce yourself and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm Courtney Slavoniak. My mother-in-law gave me the clue of it's like slow Pontiac, but with a B. And I appreciate that like a lot. I thank you first for holding space for all of these very important conversations today to bring awareness to mental health. The topic of delivery of mental health in schools is not only important in my heart, but it is the work I've been doing for at least 10 years. I come to you with over 12 years of experience as a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I maintain a private practice here in Chester, and in this role, I serve clients of all ages, specializing in the treatment of children and trauma. Since 2014, I've been working for Two Rivers Supervisory Union as a school-based clinician in our local elementary schools as an employee of the district. In this role, I also serve on our district-wide crisis team, responding to any of our schools while they are experiencing a trauma that overwhelms their ability to respond. I previously have held the role of president of Vermont's Mental Health Counselors Association, and am currently the co-executive director of Vermontka and the chair of their legislative committee. We represent over 100 licensed mental health clinicians here in Vermont. Thanks to Amy, Jennifer, and Matt, I am a fan of Success After 6 and appreciate when I get to collaborate in partnership with DAs. I'm also in awe of your mobile model, Jennifer. It's amazing. In our district, BIs, just to clarify, have the same training and education and are the same as our designated agencies. In preparation for today, I invited all of our district employees the opportunity to share with me what their experiences with mental health clinicians employed by the school versus an outside agency provider has been. Many folks, from teachers to special educators to administrators and paraeducators, all had something to say. While I will not claim to do all of them justice, largely their perspective mirrors some of the pros and cons of this model that I outlined for you here today. And there's some overlap with what you've already heard. While I have a wealth of information from behind the scenes in regard to logistics, funding, taxes, etc. about these positions, I have taken a kid-centric approach to my testimony for today. Because schools are intended to be kid-centric, concerning themselves with what is in the best interest of children. In general, I believe that the benefits to children of having a school-based clinician as an employee of the district or school far outweighs any negative aspects when taking the perspective of what is best for children. And I mirror what has been said as far as like a both and perspective versus an either or perspective. The collaboration is so valuable. First of all, relationship. One of the most valuable benefits of a school-based clinician who is employed by the district centers around relationship. As an employee of a school, you are a part of the learning community. The clinician has more opportunities to build and reinforce relationship with students and school personnel outside of the session time. Being employed by the district also lessens turnover of clinicians. Designated agencies often have turnover rates that are rather high, forcing children to learn a new person frequently, having to build new relationships and trust more often. Relationship and trust are two of the most important aspects of the therapeutic relationship. Employees of a school district tend to stay longer in their roles, and this means that kids are often able to have more chronological time with their therapist. Access and equity. Some families do not have the capacity, which has been mentioned, to facilitate the logistics, for example, transportation, time off from work, gas money, or the mental bandwidth of a child's appointment with an outside clinician. This often presents an equity and access issue for children who need services based on their family's resources and capabilities. Many children would not have access to a mental health professional if they were able or unable to receive this support as part of the school day. In addition, having a clinician a part of the school day, when something challenging arises, children are often able to access their counselor for support and regulation. A byproduct of this access is that it also reduces stigma around mental health and normalizes the learning and tools that we might use in order to navigate our emotions and obstacles as they arise. Additionally, clinicians in our district who were previously employed by designated agencies say that those agencies required an enormous amount of paperwork and are often payment centric, which changes the way that these clinicians have oriented themselves to their work previously. Community. As part of a school community, the clinician gets the opportunity to consult with professionals in the building. Teachers, special educators, occupational and physical therapists, administrators, and paras. A session in or outside of school only gives you a snapshot of a child on any given day within very specific conditions. When you are able to tap into the other supportive adults in the building, you're able to gather information about that child within other settings and help them through challenges that may limit their ability to cope, and in some cases, limit their access to their education. Resources. One of the other aspects of my role as a school-based clinician employed through the school that I enjoy and value immensely is my work with adults. Through my time at the school, I have provided trainings to adults to help educate them on mental health challenges that kids are facing. If our district were needing to go outside of our in-house expertise for these resources, it would add to those education costs. I also am a trusted confidant and resource for educators to process, release, and express the challenges that they are facing both in their personal and professional lives that impact the way that they show up for their students. Any time spent with adults who are educators has a ripple effect that directly and indirectly impacts children and their experiences within a school setting in a positive way. In addition to this, we have a district-wide team of highly trained clinicians who can be resources for each other. In our district, we meet regularly, run difficult cases by each other, and treat each other as a valuable resource, as we all come from a mental health perspective within an educational setting. I also value the way that I am able to connect the dots with different providers. I consult regularly with doctors, psychiatrists, and other specialists who work with children in order to maintain a continuity of care and to support children in a more holistic way. This aspect can be invaluable to teachers and children alike. As a longtime school person, as a mother, and as a taxpayer, I know the value of providing the service within our schools. While I could go on to identify some of the drawbacks and finer details of this model of delivery of mental health, I would pause here for the sake of time. Further details could be provided to you as part of a written testimony from me, and I just want to invite you, if we have time, to ask any questions about this model of me that you might have.
Great, thank you very much. I think we're probably, everybody here is pretty familiar with the model.
Yeah.
Talking about drawbacks, I would say the one that comes to mind immediately is that you are unable, or are you able to draw down federal dollars for your work through Success Beyond Six?
So in the school-based model of funding, if a student is on an IEP, for instance, and they are eligible to be billed through Medicaid, then that is done. So I would otherwise like fill out a Medicaid related services thing, and the district office takes care of the billing and, draws that down through that way.
Yeah, I suspect for the Success Beyond Six funding, that requires a lot of that paperwork you were referring to that non-school based clinicians have to go through, which I suspect they're not big fans of either.
Yeah, no.
Right, questions, folks? Great, thanks for that very good overview of the school-based model. I think it's very helpful to us as we kind of think about things further. Thanks a lot.
Sure, thanks.
All right, we'll break here. Let's be back at 2:10 and we'll go back into